Hi everybody, I'm Brian Franzman. Thanks for tuning in. If you like the content on this channel, please hit the like, subscribe, and share buttons down below. My guest today is Don McPherson, who is a college football Hall of Famer from Syracuse University and the author of the book, You Throw Like a Girl, The Blind Spot of Masculinity. Don, thanks for being here today.
My pleasure, Brian.
So my first introduction to Don McPherson was 1987. Don, as captain of the Syracuse football team and the starting quarterback, led us to a 5-0 start. And Penn State rumbles into the Dome for a nationally televised game. And the first play of the game was the freeze option 80-yard bomb from Don to Rob Moore, and the Carrier Dome made a sound I've never heard before or since. So obviously the play has left a mark on me. So Don, walk me through that play.
That play, I'm trying to think of the name of it, but you got it right. It was an 08, which is the run fake, and then Rob Moore on the post. The funny thing was that Rob wasn't the usual starter. Deval Glover started in that position. Rob was in for that play and didn't come out on the field. So we go out thinking this is the play, and Rob's not on the field, so we had to pull him on. Like if you didn't know that this was going to happen, if you were Penn State, that wasn't enough of a signal. And you were right. It was, we were playing on all cylinders, and that play was what our season was. It was just. We always were ready to play, and first play the game against the defending national champs who we haven't beaten in 17 years or 16 years or whatever it was. It was a pretty special moment, and we just kept riding that wave from there.
Could you guys tell that 87 was going to be special before it even happened? Like, could you feel it building?
I had a feeling over the summer when I watched how hard guys were working out. I remember a couple of days when it was just, we were grinding. It was a hot summer, and we would just grind. Everybody was on campus. It wasn't mandatory back then. And I remember a couple of days going, man, these guys are working. We're working really hard. And then, once we got to that Penn State game, we were, at that point, we were as good, and where we were best, and I get a lot of credit. Our defense was unreal that season. I mean, I got all the credit as a quarterback, but our defense was the reason why we went undefeated, without question.
Well, you talk about being undefeated. You roll through Penn State. You roll through the rest of the season. The final game of the regular season is West Virginia at the Dome. Yeah. And that one wasn't like the Penn State game. That was a close game until the very end. I'm curious to hear about the final drive with the touchdown to Pat Kelly and then the 2-point conversion to Michael Owens.
I will tell you that the final drive was what we did all season. What kept West Virginia in the game was the absolute worst athletic performance that I ever put in my entire life. And people remember the last 90 seconds, right? West Virginia scoring and us going down. And I threw 4 interceptions in the game. I fumbled twice, lost one of them. So I was responsible for 5 turnovers in that game. That's why it was a close game. But in that final drive, we got the ball. West Virginia scores with 1:10 or whatever it was, 1:15, and it was that final drive was like our season. We did everything right, and I knew exactly what was going to happen in the last couple of plays, and that's what made it click the way it did. And Pat Kelly, God rest his soul, had one of the biggest catches of his life, and that was a good moment, great moment for him. And then, of course, Michael Owens taking it in for 2. He's still bragging about that.
So you guys didn't seem to hesitate to go for 2, unlike Auburn in the Sugar Bowl, who decided to play for a tie. When an opposing team does that, it's got to be the worst feeling to not even try to go for a win against you guys.
Yeah, that was tough, especially the way that we won West Virginia to go for 2 with no time left. I mean, wasn't like we had any other choice. To watch Auburn do that was hard, and you wanted to either win or lose, right? You go into the game to have that outcome, and I think for us, there was a little bit of a feeling like we weren't supposed to be there anyway. No one expected us to be in the Sugar Bowl that year. And we had come so far, it hurt even more because we were so close to what no one thought we could do.
So you finish up the season undefeated. You start winning awards left and right.
Yeah.
Second in the Heisman. You should have won. I'm biased. So you're flying high, and the NFL draft is coming up, and you send a letter to all of the teams in the NFL saying that unless they plan on playing you at quarterback, they shouldn't draft you. What was the motivation behind sending that letter?
Well, it was clear that the NFL wasn't knocking on my door to come play quarterback. And so, and I was hearing the same things that I heard when I was coming out of high school. Will you play defensive back or will you play wide receiver? And it was less about protesting against the racism at the moment. It was less even about, it really was two things. One is I can't catch and I don't want to hit anybody, right? Number one. Number two, as you said, I've got the Davey O'Brien Award, I've got the Maxwell Award, I've got the Johnny Unitas Award, and you're going to ask me to play another position? This is what I'm good at, right? I earned the right to have that, to compete as it. And the other thing I didn't want was to get drafted by someone, I got a call from Sam Weish at the Bengals, and that was when the Bengals were at the top of their conference, went to the Super Bowl in that era, and he called me the first day of the draft and said, hey, if you're not starting, would you play another position? And at the time, Boomer Esiason was their quarterback, and I know Boomer, he's a Long Island guy like me. I said, well, I think I'm better than the guy you got. And I said, and if you don't think so, don't waste your time on me, right? If you don't want the guy you're not going to draft a quarterback who doesn't think he's the best guy on the field, in the stadium, in the state, then don't draft him. And that was my attitude about it. And I didn't want to go someplace and have that happen, and I look like the petulant child who doesn't want to play any other position, doesn't want to contribute to the team. And so I thought it was very prudent to send that letter to make sure that either I'm going to be a quarterback on your team or don't waste your time with me.
Right. Now, obviously, players like you and Doug Williams started to pave the way for African American quarterbacks, to the point now where some of the biggest stars in the league, like Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, are starring at quarterback. But it's been a long road. And in between, you've had guys like Colin Kaepernick, for example, who have not been shy about speaking up about social issues and what's going on in the world. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts about Kaepernick and Black Lives Matter.
What's really interesting is you can't see right behind me. I have a photograph, a lithograph that I haven't put it up. It's of Muhammad Ali. And I grew up, I was born in 1965, and I grew up with the brother was a boxer. I was very aware of the social justice voices of athletes, and also especially around racism. And so, as I said, when I wrote that letter to the GMs in the NFL, it wasn't about the racism as much as it was about the opportunity to play quarterback, which obviously was underpinned by the racism. And what's interesting now is that, yes, more African Americans have received the opportunity to play and compete and to be backups and to be all the things that I thought it really meant. But when you see what Colin Kaepernick has been denied. He's been allowed to go and play and make money, but has been denied his voice, his First Amendment right to speak, and in a way that says that, yes, we'll let black athletes make the money, play the position, but we're not going to let you be who you are. And if you bring your social justice, it's so funny when people idolize Muhammad Ali nowadays. They think, oh, Ali was a great guy. White people would have hated Ali today. He made Colin Kaepernick look like a lemming. Ali was, said no Viet Cong ever called me a nigger. I mean, Ali was out there when it comes to using his voice for social justice. And Colin Kaepernick pales by comparison, although I do applaud Colin Kaepernick for everything that he's done and sticking to his guns and doing the right thing that he's done with his social justice agenda.
So in 2008, you are inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. That must have been some great validation for you about what you had done over the course of your career.
Yeah, you know what? It was validation, but it was also, man, I'm a little kid when it comes to college football, and the whole thing to me was I went to the dinner the year before and I was sitting in the rafters, and I was like, wow, everybody's here, every coach, all the NFL, a bunch of NFL guys with their GMs and Goodell, And I just remember being in such awe of the Hall of Fame. And then the next year to get the call, I was more like a little kid than I was thinking, pumping my chest like I've made it. I was really in awe of all the players and the people who made the game great.
Now, you talk about being such a big fan of college football, and obviously we have a Syracuse connection. So I'm curious to know what you think about the current state of the football program under Coach Babers.
They're going to struggle a bit. I think he got a little ahead of himself, ahead of the schedule. I think if you ask him, he'd probably say that he didn't expect 10 wins as early as he got those 10 wins. And I think he's trying to do something, I've always, thought this very strongly, trying to do something in Syracuse that's difficult. And that's that wide open spread, really fast kind of offense. I still think that we are we're a Northeast school that is still, my opinion, not a powerhouse, because we're not going to spend the money to be a powerhouse. So Dino's trying to do something unique. And I think especially now with what's happening with COVID, I think it's going to be harder to recruit nationally as college football has done in the last 10, 15 years. I think it's going to be much harder because of COVID, because things are going to change. And I think if he's got to win in recruiting at home, if he can't win in New York State in recruiting, if he can't win in the Northeast, I think it's going to be a really tough road for them.
Well, what you were just saying about COVID leads me to my next question, which is, do you think we're going to have a season this fall?
I don't. And I felt this way for quite some time. Watching COVID, I think one of the things people have to remember about what happened with COVID, and as it relates to college campuses, and that's going to impact college football, is that COVID hit in March when students were leaving for spring break. So students have not been on campus en masse with COVID. We just haven't had it. They went home for spring break and they never came back. So now you're going to bring back, all these students to campus. And one thing we've known about college students and COVID is that they don't listen. They're not going to socially distance. They are going to be a problem. And so now you're going to bring all of them back. So you have college football has a couple of problems. One is, does campus come back? Two, once you bring them back, are you going to get college football to live in a bubble? You can't do it. You can't do it for a number of reasons. One, the pro sports, the Marlins have already shown that it's going to be difficult, and they're in a bubble. But two, you can't bring college students back and put them in a bubble because they have to go to class. And if they're not going to class, then are they students in the student-athlete argument? And are you going to test them every day? Like we're testing the professionals. Well, if you're testing them every day, you're going to test your non-student athletes? Because if you then it's an extra benefit that the NCAA doesn't allow, right? And so what happens if schools have to shut down again and they send their kids home? Does football stay on campus so that they can compete? And if so, does that make them essential? Because that gets into a conversation that nobody wants to have, at least in higher ed, about what is the worth of your student athletes to your program or to your school, not to the program, but to your school. And I think that's where the problems are going to get even worse. And then there's all the other things that I'm not even mentioning. That's traveling and putting student athletes on a plane and hotels and traveling to other states. What happens if you have to go to a state that's a hot spot and they're spiking? I mean, there's just so many variables that have not been considered or have been considered, and right now they're just trying to play the time game.
You mentioned money and the worth of student athletes. So I would wonder if you believe that college athletes should be paid. I
don't, and I've been a part of this discussion for a couple of days. Well, feels like my entire life, because I was one at one point. But professionally and in work that I do around education, around social issues, I don't think they should be paid, but I do think that they should be aware of the multi-billion-dollar industry that they drive, and we should include them in that. I've always believed that we should include them in that. Your education about the industry that you are a part of, to me, is more valuable than the dollars that you may throw at a student athlete. And they did, the cost of attendance, and they put a few dollars in student athletes' pockets a couple of years ago. But this notion that they should be paid, to me, is we should make due on the first promise. They're not there to get paid to be a football player for the institution. They are there to get an education first. And we haven't made due on that promise. of affording them a quality education that really will springboard them in life. And if we think that they come in there and they're going to go pro, we just have to look at the numbers and realize that your education is worth more than the money.
Right. So once you wrapped up your professional playing career, you're 29 years old, you have to figure out what to do with the rest of your life. And you wind up at Northeastern University, which, by the way, is the alma mater of my sister and brother-in-law.
Nice.
And so I'm curious what led you to Northeastern and what type of work you were doing there.
I went to Northeastern to work with a guy named Richard Lapchick, who may be familiar to some folks. Richard is the son of Joe Lapchick, the first head coach and general manager of the Knicks. And Richard, because of his father signing a black player in 1950, Nat Clifton, to the Knicks, watched his father go through, being that pioneer in the NBA of signing a black player. And Richard Lapchick devoted his life to the issue of racism in sport. Was very active in the anti-apartheid movement. When I was in college, that was happening. And then was personally invited to Nelson Mandel's inauguration. So here's this white man doing work around racism in sport. And as I said earlier, that was my issue was the whole black quarterback saga. And so I went to work with Rich at the center, and it was there that I met a guy named Jackson Katz, who for the first time in my life I heard someone talking about gender as opposed to race. And that's when I started doing work around men's violence against women and masculinity.
And then so over the past few decades, that's been a main focus of the work you've been doing.
It has been, and it's been an incredible journey, because it's taken me from using the platform of sports to have these important conversations to really having an examination, a personal examination. I published a book last year, and at one point the title was "You Throw Like a Girl: Raising Boys to Be the Man," because I was coming at it from that educational perspective of how do we help young boys, and then as I got a little further in the writing and my examination, I realized that there were so many blind spots that I hadn't fully examined with my male privilege and my privilege as an athlete, and how that kept me from a conversation about my whole and healthy understanding of myself. And so the blind spot of masculinity comes from this privilege that we have as men to not have to examine what it means to be a man, and how that leads us often down a road that we don't fully actualize who we are. So the book and the work that I've done has really evolved from addressing issues of men's violence against women to truly having a conversation about healthy and whole masculinity.
Right. So now, we see a lot of, protests around the country for Black Lives Matter, but we've also seen over the past few years the Me Too movement.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to get your thoughts about the Me Too movement as opposed to where things were when you first started.
What's really interesting is that when I first started this work, was in 1994, the latter half of 1994, was the summer of OJ. And it was almost a 20-year span to 2014, when the summer of Ray Rice and the video and all that. And not much had changed in those 20 years. And part of the reason why not much had changed is because we weren't examining men and masculinity. We were kind of saying all these high-profile athletes, their privilege and all this, but we weren't really looking at what's going on with men. Me Too did, I think, for a lot of men, Me Too happens because of the impact of social media, the impact of media in general, the impact of all the activism that women have been doing for so many decades to raise their voices and to be heard. All that happened, but there was another significant thing that happened with Me Too. I think a lot of men felt indicted because they felt the things that they had done in their lives. Many men heard, "Me too, I blame you." And I think what also many men heard, the vast majority of men heard, was failure. Failure to do that fundamental thing that we're supposed to do as being a man, protect our women. Because we heard our grandmothers, our mothers, our sisters, our daughters, our wives, our female friends, we heard them say, "Yeah, Dad, that happened to me too." And remember that boss, remember that boyfriend, remember that guy you love so much. Yeah, that guy. And so men heard failure to do that thing, that fundamental thing we were supposed to do. And the other thing we heard was that we can't, or felt that we can't do the thing that gets our masculinity back. We can't go beat the crap out of the guy. So what do we do as men? And I think that was an important moment for men to sit back and to watch hundreds of thousands of women marching in the street saying, "This has got to stop. This happened to me too." And I think that was a significant moment for men. And that's what I'd say it has to cause men some introspection to look at our culpability in this global problem.
Well, obviously, there's been progress made, but we see even just last week where a congressman, verbally abuses a congresswoman on the steps of the Capitol with no real repercussions to the guy. So as far as things have come, we still have a long way to go.
Without question, and I will never, I'm one of those people who will always be on the side of we're not there yet, because that's my role. That's what I do. However, I will say that the fact that became a story and that got the traction that it did is part of the progress that we're seeing. It's not, it's the proverbial, frog in the boiling pot of water. If you're in the movement, you don't see it. But extraneously, there's been a lot of progress that has been made, and there's so many things, whether it's marriage equality, there's so many things that have happened that they feel like overnight to some people, but they've been a long, slow, journey of progress. And I think we're moving it. That's why one of the reasons why there's so much unrest right now in our country is because there are so many voices now that are finally being heard, and not just listened to, but heard. Truly, and people are starting to realize that they have a role to play in eradicating problems that have been around for too long.
So you mentioned your book earlier, and there's also a film as well. Can you talk a little bit about both the book and the film?
The book, interesting, I wrote the book more than 20 years ago, and the first draft, it was on Oprah, and Oprah gave me the name of a publisher, and that publisher declined the book. And essentially what that publisher said, even with Oprah's endorsement, which is incredible, he basically said that men don't care about this issue and women don't need your book, and women are the ones who buy books. And I found that to be troubling and sexist against men, that men don't care to try to be better fathers, better husbands, better sons, that we don't care about being better people for ourselves, and that we don't need to examine this. And that was a struggle for me personally, to exercise all the things that I was living through and discovering, but also that this conversation needed to be had. And so I've stuck at the book for all these years. I keep coming back to it and dusting it off. And finally, in the aftermath of Ray Rice and all that, I was doing a show on MSNBC and was there with David Zirin. He said, "Hey, man, you should write a book." I said, "Well, I already did." And like I said earlier, the book has evolved. The Blind Spot of Masculinity became the subtitle, and that's something that I look at the work that we do and I do around masculinity as not just about the prevention of violence against women, but I talk about that blind spot of masculinity now in my lectures in the context of Chris Gedney. I don't know if you remember Chris, but
Sure.
He played tight end at Syracuse, and Chris, who committed suicide and was one of 32 guys that I know, 33 guys I know I played ball with in the NFL and college and CFL who are dead. And guys who, it wasn't just CTE, that's a really easy and convenient reason for these deaths, but they're guys who had all kinds of other problems, marital problems, financial problems, emotional problems, depression, things that we don't as men talk about, and we don't say we need help, and I'm struggling, I can't do this alone. We don't do that. And so those problems just grow and grow, and we layer and layer on top of those things. And so I'm really interested in the book, in the book encouraging that conversation among men. And then the video came about as a result of that. Actually, it was a filmmaker who came to me and said, I really intrigued about your perspective on men in this conversation, not just about prevention of violence against women, but men's health and what I refer to as aspirational masculinity. And that's what came about with the film. And it's a 36-minute educational film by the Media Education Foundation. And so far, we're about to, actually, it's just starting to push it out. And timing is good because people are shut in with COVID. It's a good time to have a film out there so that people can go learn and get a little information.
You also have a new website as well. Tell me a little bit about that.
It is, it's funny. I had this website for DonaldMcPherson.com, and I always wanted Don McPherson because that's kind of like what people know me as, and it's shorter and easier and all that. And it took me 10 years to finally get DonMcPherson.com. And so I went out and got on a young site, helping a young student at Syracuse, a kid named Dan Getz. And then I had to tell him early on. I said, "Listen, I'm 55 years old. I have no idea what I'm doing. So talk to me like an old man and help me build this website." So he did, and we got a lot of good information on it. We got a lot of stuff there on the book and on the video. Just started a blog on there as well, and I'm actually in the process of writing a blog now about how I believe this will be a fall without football, and how we should take advantage of that fall without football and focus on other things that, dare I say, are more important than whether or not we have a football season. So it's been a good little experience so far with the website, and getting back and getting connected with some folks out there.
Well, all sounds great. Don, thanks so much for taking some time to chat today. I really appreciate it. And if you are interested in finding out more about Don's website and his book, take a look at the links below in the description of this video. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and I'll see you soon.